This project actually started out as a test of an idea I had for making something that looks like Damascus steel, made from contrasting layers of wood, just to see how well it will work out. And at the time I had no intention of seeing it through to a finished knife. It was only after I had the blade stock done that I decided to go the rest of the way. I started out by planing layers off two different types of wood. The first is spruce, which is lighter in color, and the second is cedar, that is much darker. I figured the easiest way to make the wavy pattern in the blade was to use something that I already had that had a suitable texture. And so I had these pieces of light fixture lens that I cut down to size. I cut 2 pieces of plywood to act as backers for the thin plastic, then used spray adhesive to attach them, and sanded down the really high points. I'm using epoxy that takes a while to set up, since it will take a while to glue up all the layers. When it's fully cured, it'll be strong and hard. With the glue mixed up, the fun can begin. I started with a layer of spruce by coating it with epoxy and spreading it out onto the form. Next, a layer of cedar, but that's where I ran into some problems. The cedar was too flimsy and kept tearing apart as I tried to work with it. I eventually figured out the best way to do it, and it went much smoother after that. If I did it again, I'd use some other dark wood rather than cedar, since it's too brittle. I'm not sure exactly how many layers I ended up with, but had run out of epoxy and didn't want to mix up any more. It felt thick enough anyway, so I clamped on the other side of the form. I really expected more epoxy to drip out, but I guess the wood layers absorbed most of it. I left it to set overnight, and the next day I pulled the clamps off. They were a little bit stuck to the forms. Then I pried off 1 layer of plywood and cleaned up the edge on the disc sander so that it would go flat against the fence on the table saw. I trimmed off one side, then the other. The lens came off easily, which was unexpected, but also a good thing. I used the table saw again to cut away most of the texture on that face of the material. Then pried off the other piece of backing plywood and the other piece of plastic lens. I used my belt grinder to flatten the other face of the blade, and I could see some of the pattern in the material and how well it turned out. It was at that time that I decided to go all the way and make this into a knife. For the handle, I cut a piece of sumac to length. This was a tree that was growing in my backyard that I cut down a few years ago, and after letting it dry out, I've been using it for small projects. To glue the scales onto the blade, I'm using epoxy again, but the faster setting kind. Just spread it out evenly on both pieces and clamp the blade in between. A few hours later, I started shaping the handle. The majority of this is done at my belt grinder. I have a rough idea of the handle shape and just wing it without any specific layout. When I'm happy with the handle, I can start working on the blade by cutting it to rough shape and refining it with the sanding block. The blade geometry is drop point with a full convex grind and a relief cut near the guard made with a round file. Even though the blade material is harder than any wood, it is still not nearly as hard as the softest metals, and I need to be fairly gentle while working with it. There's a lot of sanding, but eventually the interesting grain pattern of the blade shows through. With the basic shaping done, I switched to finer grit paper to do the final sanding on the blade and the handle. The finishing touch is a couple of coats of spray polyurethane to bring out the grain, give it some protection, and keep it looking clean. Even though this isn't a very useful or practical knife, it does look pretty cool, and the project was an interesting one. It also lets me know that the method I used for making the blade is effective, and I may use it again on a future project. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.